Good evening, everyone. Today, my group and I are presenting our infographic on ethnographic research. The main idea is that ethnography helps researchers look beyond what they first notice. Instead of relying solely on surveys or interviews, ethnographic researchers spend time in real settings. They observe, listen, ask questions, and try to understand what people's experiences really mean. This is especially useful in education because classrooms and schools are more than places where learning happens. They are social spaces shaped by routines, relationships, expectations, power dynamics, and unwritten rules. Ethnography helps researchers understand those deeper meanings. So, what is ethnography? Ethnography is a type of qualitative research that helps researchers understand a group of people in their natural setting. In education, this can mean studying a classroom, a school, or a group of teachers or students, and even a principal's day-to-day. Researchers use ethnography when they want to understand what everyday life is really like in that setting. The goal is not just to collect quick facts, but to build a detailed picture of people's experiences. For instance, if we wanted to understand how students learn the unofficial rules of a grade 1 classroom, we would not only ask the teacher what the rules are, we would also observe how students line up, how they ask for help, interact with their peers, and even respond to teacher directions. These small everyday moments can reveal a lot about the culture of a classroom. Now let's talk about the core concepts of ethnographic research. One important concept is culture. It refers to the shared routines, beliefs, behaviors, and way of life within a group. In a kindergarten classroom, this may include carpet time, lining up, sharing jobs, prayer routines, as is my case, as I'm in a Catholic school, and how students solve problems together. Another concept is holistic perspective. This means researchers look at the whole setting, not just one event or moment. For example, a student refuses to join a lesson. An ethnographic researcher would consider the classroom routines, the teacher expectations, identity, and past experience that may have shaped that student's behavior. Contextualization. Now, this means looking at the bigger picture before making any conclusions. If a student refuses to write during journal time, the researcher would not simply assume the student is misbehaving. They would consider the student's confidence, energy levels, perhaps their relationship with writing, and also what happened earlier in the day. Now let's talk about emic perspective. This means trying to understand the classroom from the insider's point of view. This matters because people can experience the same situation in different ways. During carpet time, the teacher may see that as a structured learning routine. One student may see it as a chance to share ideas, and another student may feel nervous about speaking. These different viewpoints show that there can be multiple realities within the same classroom. On the other hand, an etic perspective means using the researcher's outside view to analyze what's happening. The researcher may notice that predictable routines help students feel safe and support positive behavior. Strong ethnographic research balances both perspectives by listening carefully to participants while also looking for patterns. Now, ethnography also uses the description. This means describing what is seen and heard in detail. Instead of simply saying, oh, the students were excited, the researcher might describe students raising their hand, whispering to their partners, or even pointing to the anchor charts. Now, member checking. This means asking participants if the researcher understood things correctly. This helps ensure that people's experiences are represented fairly. The researcher might ask the teacher whether description of classroom routines is accurate, or ask students simple questions such as, did I understand what you meant? Finally, ethnography requires a non-judgmental approach. Researchers try not to judge behavior too quickly. Instead, they slow down, observe carefully, and ask what the behavior means within that setting. If a student moves around during a lesson, the researcher might consider whether the student needs a movement break, clearer instructions, or even additional support, rather than immediately viewing that behavior as negative. Now let's talk about designing an ethnographic study. Ethnography is a good fit when researchers want to understand routines, relationships, belonging, or hidden rules, or even power. These are things that cannot be fully understood through numbers alone. For example, a researcher might ask, how do students learn the unofficial rules of a classroom? Ethnographic studies often begin with a broad research question. As the researcher spends time in the setting, the question may become clear. Researchers usually choose participants or settings intentionally because they can provide rich information. The goal is not to study a large random sample, but to deeply understand a specific group, place, or experience. Ethnographic researchers also do not usually begin with fixed hypotheses. Instead, they observe, listen, notice patterns, and adjust their thinking as the study develops. This makes ethnography flexible because it allows the researcher to follow what is actually happening. Finally, ethnography takes time. Researchers need to plan for repeated observations, relationship building, detailed note-taking, interviews, and ongoing analysis. So now let's talk about how we collect data. There are two types: participant observation and interviewing. Participant observation means the researcher spends time in the setting. They watch what people do and may take part in some activities. At the same time, the researcher must step back enough to record, reflect, and think carefully about what's happening. This balance matters because staying too distant can cause the researcher to miss important details, while becoming too involved can make it harder to analyze the setting clearly. Interviewing is also important because it helps researchers understand how people explain their own experiences. In a school, this might include speaking with students, teachers, administrators, or families. Ethnographers may also collect artifacts and records, such as student work, lesson plans, and school documents. Using different sources of information help researchers build a fuller and more accurate picture of the setting. Now let's talk a little bit about field writing. This is an important part of ethnographic research because the quality of the researcher's notes affects the quality of the study. Researchers need to record what they see, hear, think, and wonder while they're in the field. Field jottings, those are quick notes taken during an observation. They just help the researcher remember important details later. Then there are two types of field notes: descriptive and reflective. Descriptive explain what happened. They describe the setting, people, actions, events. Reflective field notes explain what the researcher is thinking. These notes, it may include questions, possible meanings, patterns, or concerns about bias. Now, field diary, that's more personal. It gives the researcher space to record their feelings, reactions, frustrations, or concerns. This matters because researchers are human, and their feelings can affect what they notice and how they interpret events. And lastly, a field log. This helps the researcher stay organized by comparing what they plan to do with what actually happened. Overall, ethnography depends on careful, honest, and detailed notes. Field writing helps researchers keep track of what they observe and reflect on what it may mean. Now, let's make sense of some of this data. In ethnography, analysis doesn't only happen at the end. It happens throughout the study. Researchers collect information, they think about what it means, they look for patterns, collect more information, and then they adjust their understanding as they go. One important step is identifying patterns and themes. Researchers ask, what keeps showing up? What seems important across different moments? Another step is triangulation, which means comparing different sources of information to build a fuller picture. For example, if a student says they feel included in the classroom, a researcher might compare that interview with classroom observations, peer interactions, and teacher comments. The goal is not to prove anyone wrong, but to understand the situation more clearly. And they also look at key events. These are moments that reveal something important about the culture of a group. In a school, this might be a conflict at recess or a classroom discussion. The infographic also touches on crystallization. This is when pieces of the study begin to come together. After spending time with the data, the researcher starts to see a clearer picture of what's happening. Let's touch on strengths and cautions quickly. One strength is that it provides researchers with a rich and human understanding of a setting. It can reveal things that surveys and interviews might miss. It can show the difference between what people say happens and what is actually happening. At the same time, it does have its limitations. It takes time to observe and interview and take notes, analyze information, and check interpretations. Researcher bias is also a concern because no researcher is completely neutral. This means ethnographers must be honest and reflective about their assumptions. Ethnographic findings are also not easy to generalize. A study of one classroom or one school does not automatically apply to every classroom or school. Overall, the value of ethnography is its depth. It helps researchers understand one setting in a careful, detailed, and meaningful way. Now let's quickly touch on some studies where we see ethnography in action. Fairbanks and Broughton. This study showed the classroom culture and how it shaped students' understanding of literacy and how they saw themselves as learners. The second example was a study focused on multilingual students in science classrooms. They found the students learned science more effectively when they were encouraged to use all of their language resources. And the third example, Stevenson and Havgard, explored how classroom management in multi-ethnic classrooms and how it impacted minority participation. So to conclude, ethnography explains what researchers need to know. Our infographic explains what researchers need to know before choosing ethnography. They need to understand what it is, when to use it, how to design a study, and how to collect data. This research helps us look beneath the surface of everyday life. It asks researchers to slow down, observe carefully, and understand behavior in a context. Overall, it reminds us that people's action make more sense when we understand the context around them. Thank you.